morning, Cynthia.
Good morning.
Good morning, Cynthia.
I trust.
Good
Okay,
morning.
good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, Ayo.
Good
I
morning.
trust we are keep. Good morning. I trust we are keeping safe in light of the current realities of the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Cynthia Pomudiare, and I'm the Director for Stakeholder Relations at the Integrity Organization. And I welcome you all to this webinar, the first of the MSME Standard Conversation Series with the theme Crisis Response for MSMEs. The gradual easing of the lockdown is a journey. It will take a while for normalcy to return as countries all over the world begin to count the human and economic cost to their nations. Activities and businesses have been greatly impacted by this pandemic, and recent events around the world indicate a gradual recovery of economies worldwide. Most impacted by the pandemic are the MSMEs. The MSME sector is a crucial contributor to employment, economic and export growth of nations. In Nigeria, the MSME contributes about 48% of national GDP, account for 98% of the private sector, and 84% of national employment. It is imperative for MSMEs to have the relevant information and tools to enable them navigate through this stormy time. The MSME standard is a web portal that brings verified and certifiable service providers within the reach of service users looking to build sustainable business process and introduce the use of compliance and anti-corruption controls in their business. This webinar seeks to bring together thought leaders within the Nigerian business community to propose homegrown solutions to address the going concern risk to MSMEs. We believe this webinar is a platform for business owners and leaders to ask questions around their peculiar challenges and concerns, and hopefully appropriate responses and strategic plans required to minimize the disruptive impact of the pandemic to the MSMEs and to achieve timely business recovery would be proposed. Discussions will center around the management of crisis for the MSMEs and what they need to do during and post COVID-19 pandemic, navigating contractual rights and obligations, digital transformation for small businesses, stimulus, bailout, concessions by government, imminent loan default, and credit vis-a-vis ballooning interest accruals. I wish to thank our partners ProShare and Deal HQ for all their contributions towards putting this webinar together, the speakers and the participants for taking time out to be part of this. Since we are all in a comfortable location and know where the restrooms are located, I therefore call on Mr. Ayo Bankole, our moderator for today's discussion, to move this webinar forward. Thank you. Mr. Ayo.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. Thank you very much. Good morning, Mr. Apampa, the speakers. Thank you for putting this together. Thank you, all the participants, for being here this morning. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Can you hear me, please?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Again, we have, I'll just take a quick introduction of our speakers for the benefit of our participants. We have with us a Siri, PwC. She deals with private wealth and tax services. We have Tosin Ajose. Hello.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Good morning, Tosin. Tosin is the lead advisor with DLHQ. Tosin Ajose, thank you for coming. We have Miss Nkem Dilling Bego. Nkem, I hope I got your name right.
Yes, sort of. Kendall Mwaje Bell. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I hope I did not murder your name. Good morning. We also have Mr. Soji Apampa. Mr. Soji Apampa is the CEO of CBI. CBI has been doing excellent, work with, ensuring integrity and accountability both in the corporate and public sector. Mr. Soji, good morning.
Hello. I think I know.
Wow.
Hello. Is iron
Hello?
still on?
Hello?
Hello. Is iron still on?
I think you may have gone off for a while.
Okay.
From the way he was sounding, I believe he was having some kind of internet connectivity issue.
Okay, yeah, I got it back. So I have to switch my internet connection because I think I had issues with the first one. Apologies, please. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Loud and clear.
Loud and clear, right? Okay, yes. Apologies. So I don't know if you had continued while I was away, or if I should continue where I stopped. Um, so that's Mr. Soji. Mr. Soji Apampa. Hello.
We can hear you. Ayo, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir. Thank you for coming. Okay, we also have Mrs. Olufunke Smith. Mrs. Olufunke Smith is the group head retail banking of First Bank with us. Thank you for coming, Mrs. Funke Smith. So this event is focused as discussing, we're going to be discussing how MSMEs can effectively respond to the crisis situation that the COVID-19 pandemic has caused in the Nigerian economy, especially for SMEs who do not necessarily, and our speaker list is very rich across various segments of the economy, banking, consulting, technology, to share ideas with you on how you can, if you own SME or you work with, any of the MSMEs, how you can best respond to this crisis and better position your business for the era post-COVID. So I'm going to go straight to Our first speaker is Siri. Siri, are you there?
Um, Hi, I'm here. Can you hear me, Ayo?
Yes, I can hear you, Siri.
Okay, awesome. Once you say a Siri, I think Siri on the iPhone responds. So maybe you should try and mute your phone so that it doesn't disturb us. They stole my
Yes,
name.
yes, I've done that. I've done that.
Alrighty.
Okay,
Okay, so we
according to a PwC report, I mean, luckily you work with PwC. I think you're the second person on the panel that I've worked in the same organization with, uh, and I mean, it's good to have you on this panel. MSMEs account for about 96% of Nigeria's businesses and 84% of our employment, and that shows the strategic importance that they play in our economy. So their survival essentially is critical to our economy. If they die, the economy essentially collapses, especially the period after COVID, where the entire world will be struggling to survive. So aids and support may not come in heavy flows as is usually done. So what are the buffers or windows that exist for MSMEs to alleviate their tax and other regulatory obligations in the face of this crisis?
all right. Thanks, Ayo. So just before I expatiate on the tax measures available to alleviate, maybe just to bring the picture closer home. Um, and I thought to also just drive it home, speaking a bit about, the pandemic that we're facing now. It's one pretty much unusual. It's unprecedented. It's not something that we're all accustomed to. And so we don't have the answers readily for any single SME. And responses definitely would have to be tailored or customized based on the specific needs of those individual SMEs. One thing we've also noticed, we have a survey that we did quite recently, and the media tenure for any CEO is about 5 years. So the last pandemic we even had was the SARS outbreak, which was in 2003, that infected only about 8,000 people and lasted 9 months. COVID is much more, 10 times more, and it's spreading fast. And so just painting that picture, what comes to mind, especially for leaders of all of the SMEs that we have in Nigeria, is how are we even prepared to deal with anything like this? There's no rule book on the preparation that's required, but there are practices that we've gained from previous incidences that can be applied here as well. And then specific addresses or solutions that have been made by governments, which I'll share. I think one of the key things around taxes, because tax is a big issue, and a big issue because with the pandemic, one of the key things we'll be suffering is a spike in unemployment. There'll be a lot more people unemployed. So you're thinking through how do you retain those people, but also the payee taxes associated with those individuals. And sometimes some organizations actually take the hit for those personal income taxes for their individuals based off of the contracts that they signed, so that they then become additional costs. Liquidity is also going to be a big issue and still continues to be. And questions around that would be, where do I even get the cash to pay the corporate taxes that are due me, and at the right time as well? To the extent that you're not paying them at the right time, then penalties and interest kick in, and then that just becomes an additional cost for the business. Some of the palliative measures that the government has put through have been encouraging, but of course still need to be improved upon. And some of them relate to just the extension of time for filing of returns. What I liked was the response from Lagos State, and that's fortunately Lagos State houses to a very large extent most of the SMEs that we're looking at. Announced an extension for the filing of returns, so that you didn't have to file your returns at the end of March anymore. You could then file it within a 3 months grace period, which is good. Another thing as well that came through was with the Federal Capital Territory. So we've seen that the big metropolis have responded rather fast to extend filing of returns. Some of the concerns as well that have been picked up with COVID are relating to, just the welfare of our people, how are we protected? And some of the interactions that we've had or continue to have is with the tax authorities and some of the measures that have been put through around social distancing and just ensuring that we're not spreading any diseases just because we've been called for an audit or we've been called to come look at a document. There have also been electronic platforms that have been put out by the authorities to just address those, which is good. The other thing as well that I think we're seeing is the stimulus package that has been released by the government. And that's been helpful to some extent. I'm not sure how many SMEs have availed of the opportunity that it presents, but that's something that also needs to be looked at. And I'm glad that we also have a banker on the call, on the webinar, we can also throw more light to that. So there's a facility that has been approved by the central bank, and that facility is supposed to be availed by SMEs at reduced interest rates of 5%. If you just apply, go to NERSAL's website, you could get, access to some of those loans at a very reduced interest rate of 5% with moratorium periods of about 1 year. So those are some of the fiscal measures that have been introduced to alleviate the sufferings. Penalties and interest have also been waived to the extent that you pay, your liabilities, the principal sum at a certain date, and I think those measures are welcome, but there will definitely be need for improvement on some of those measures. And I think I'll just stop there for now and hand over the mic to Ayo in case you want to expand on that question. Ayo.
Okay. Thank you, Asiri. You did, I mean, very good justice to that question. However, from your experience in this market, do you have some sort of um, some sort of introductory background or some sort of general content that you would like to set the tone with, that you would like to provide before I go ahead with, because you have to give us, you have to respond to my question, but I don't know if you have other content that you like to share to set the pace for other conversations that you may have today.
Yeah, so hello. I think the other thing as well to be considering at this time, at least based on our experience, is just how nimble and fast and how quickly leaders should be making decisions at this time. No one is ever prepared for a crisis, but the response that you provide during a crisis is what will take you through the long haul, but also your recovery plan. What are your plans for business continuity and all that? And from our experience, we run a global crisis center. PwC runs a global crisis center so that we've been dealing with crisis management even prior to COVID. But again, as I said before, some of the reactions or responses that will be required this period would be unique and some of them innovative and creative. And so what we find in most crises is that your largest asset for responding is really your workforce or your people. And so some of the responses you may find would be that people consider, what's my biggest cost now? How can I reduce my cost? How can I contain costs because I'm experiencing cash flow issues? I'm not as liquid. I'm not as productive anymore. Shops are closed. I can't access that physically and all that. What's the right response? Is the right response really about laying off of staff or suspending them? And like I said, those responses will differ one company to another. But I think the general perspective or general considerations really around ensuring that leaders continue to communicate effectively during the periods of a crisis. Making sure that we're transparent about the challenges that the businesses face. And that communication needs to be pervasive, whether to the employees, whether to the shareholders, whether to regulators as well, or to even your family. So being clear, being transparent, and ensuring that there are no conflicts between internal and external stories about companies, depending on what trajectory you are on that growth chain, is important. What we've seen is there's a lot of stories just filtering the internet, some of them fake, some of them not true. And sometimes some of these stories are causing a lot of panic with the people who would be the greatest asset of your company. And so ensuring that we're aligning stories right is very important at this time. One of the studies that we've also done in PwC is around provide analysis on perceptions and perspectives from different companies and organizations. And what they have found is that the level of trust that employees hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
That employees would give to their businesses far outweighs what they would give to governments and media combined, so that they trust more the companies that they work for. And this gives leaders in those companies a very good vantage point for holding on to their workforce and making them the engine growth for their businesses post a crisis. And so in this time, communication is very important to hold that sail through. The other thing as well, which we already have a strength on in Nigeria, is the sense of community. Just holding your people together and making sure that they don't feel unwanted and they don't feel out of that equation. So we do that very easily in Nigeria, which is good. Just checking up, how are you doing? It's as simple as that. The other thing is collaboration. And I think that's the place where we can gain a lot of advantage as a country from. And collaboration in the sense of not minding that there are chains of command in your organization, but identifying that each person has an asset and quality that's worth building on and strength that you can rest on as well. There are sometimes we consider that, oh, I'm so senior in the organization and I should be the one wearing the cap and leading the team all through to the end and providing the answers to the problems. Whereas your employees can just be a bounce off for some of the solutions that will come. It might just be the smallest in the organization. So to that extent, collaboration is very critical at this period. Staying together, it's our nature, very nature as human beings, that we derive strength from each other. And so that's, I think, the greatest response that we can ever give during the crisis. And then others will follow. And some of those would be, how do you respond very quickly to just shortages in your supply chain? What are the alternatives that you're looking at? If you're not able to import from China anymore, what are the alternatives for your raw materials locally? Things around loans as well are things to be considered too. Liquidity. How do I stay afloat this period? What loans can I get? What interest rates can I get? What concessionary rates can I get from government loans as opposed to going to banks with huge rates? And good enough, some of the banks already have SME desks so that you can contact them. I think this is not the time also to begin to put out negative vibes and being too pessimistic. To the extent an opportunity is highlighted or identified, make the best use of it while it avails you. Other solutions may also be around cost containment. How are my costs? What are those critical ones that I need to incur? What are the ones that I need to reduce or begin to extinguish at this point in time? And the unfortunate truth is that in some cases, it might be that you need to suspend some contracts for some of your staff that may not be critical during the period of the crisis, and then revisit them again later. To the extent that you can even hold certain contracts, you do hold them. But unfortunately, in Nigeria, we have situations where rent you have to have paid ahead. So you may not be able to break some of those contracts, but perhaps negotiating as well with the landlords to say, oh, can that period be extended due to the inactivity that has already been experienced by COVID? Those are some measures as well that could be looked at. I think the final last point would be around engaging your customers and probably identifying strategies for rebranding during this period. And very closely, I would link that to identifying new income streams, because the truth is that this crisis is going to test a lot of points for businesses, and some of it may be around the revenue you earn and even the customer base that you're going to be able to hold on to. So, to the extent that you find that this area is not something that we can still continue to generate revenues from, you should then begin to look at what are the alternatives for making money to stay afloat during this period. We've seen some people be innovative around even face masks, production of face masks during this period. I think that's innovative and compelling, and that's reflective of a business that will try and survive beyond this period. So I'll close by saying that there is nothing that is above any human. COVID-19 will come and it will go. But I think that the ones who prepare and the ones who hold on to their greatest assets during this period and are able to sail through and manage and identify proper recovery plans are the ones who will come out on the other side of the road. So I don't know if that helps to bring at least some general concept around the topic. I'll be glad to offer any additional perspectives if you would ask me. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Esiri. Sure, that does help. It does set the tone for a lot of our content that is yet to come. I think I'll give our other speakers the same opportunity to share to set the tone for the conversation from their backgrounds and their understanding of the topic. I'll start with Tosin. Tosin, you are a lawyer, and I'm sure that you deal with a lot of clients in this space, and you've also somehow been affected, either positively or negatively, by the COVID crisis. Can you share with us? Can you give us some introduction to the topic and what you've experienced?
Okay, thank you, Ayo. Um, I'll look at this from different perspectives. So we do advise a lot of clients in the business space. Some of our clients are MSMEs. We are an MSME ourselves, even though we operate in the legal space. So I can talk both from our personal experience and also from some of the experiences that some of our clients, have had. So the critical focus for any business in this period, I think, should be survival. And even more so if you're a small or medium scale business, because what that means is that then you don't really have the latitude of resources or the strength of personnel, that the other big organizations have. So, I mean, one of the things that I think is most critical in this period is for us to have up and doing crisis leadership plans to see organizations through this period. One of the things that I have learned, in my own personal experience is as a leader of a small organization, you have to be responsive with decision making. Your decision making capabilities have to be very agile. What is right for the business today may no longer be right for the business tomorrow. So you must also have the flexibility to adapt to change as the circumstances change. You must be responsive to the needs of your stakeholders, and the stakeholders could be your customers, could be your clients, could be your employees, or any other person who plays a critical role within your organization's scope. I also think that, like Siri mentioned, communication is extremely, extremely critical in this period. I'd say communication and engagement. I mean, one of the very key things that we had to do for many of our clients at the very beginning or at the onset of all of this crisis was to start having, conversations around hand-holding them in terms of communication with stakeholders in this period. And like she also mentioned, just being very upfront on the circumstances helps with all in your communication with all stakeholders, and understanding your obligations, I think. So one of the things I was going to mention, which I think is critical, is that every business should at the beginning of this crisis have done what I would call a contract performance and employment and enforcement assessment. And what that basically means is that you should have sat down and looked at all the gamut of the commercial obligations that you have and try to dimension them and understand, what the scope of your obligations are, whether you are able to still perform these obligations under the circumstances. If you're not able to, why you're not able to? If you're able to what extent? And if you find yourself in situations where, because there are two sides of it, there will be obligations that you have to people, and there would also be obligations that people have to you. So you need to keep track of what your obligations are to all your stakeholders and understand which ones you are able to meet and which ones you're not able to, and determine why you're not able to meet them and how you want to deal with the fact that you're unable to meet them. On the converse side, the parties that have obligations to you, suppliers, business solutions providers, and what have you, what are their obligations to you? I mean, in situations where they are unable to perform, how does it impact, your business continuity plan? Are you able to look at alternatives? Are you having conversations with them? I mean, everybody is affected. So, I mean, to expect that anyone will be 100% in terms of contract performance or in terms of meeting their obligations would be, to my mind, very foolhardy. But the point is, how do you ensure that you're able to still run your organization at the most optimal level that you can, bearing, all the circumstances? I think another thing that I would like to talk about is that at the end of all of this, we're going to see an emergence of a different kind of medium and small scale businesses. We will see businesses that would have gone through this phase and would have been tested in terms of their capacity, would have been tested in terms of innovation, and you will see very resilient and very multidimensional organizations that would emerge and that would be even the better for the country and our economy.
Thank you so much,
Ayo, I
Tosin.
hope that
Yes, that helps. I'll go to Mr. Soja Pampa. Mr. Soja Pampa, please, can you share with us from your experience? Can you set the tone for the conversation? What are
Okay.
What do you think are the biggest issues facing you government intervention kind of vision from that angle?
Okay. I think that this is a time that the government wants to intervene with the MSMEs, or rather, this is the time that the government ought to intervene with the MSMEs. And why? Because there's no way a government spending by itself is going to jumpstart the economy back into productivity. We are in the mess we are as a country because our productivity levels have been so low. We have not been producing enough. We have been a major importer of almost every item across every sector. So even though our MSMEs represent about 96% of the private sector, we haven't really given them the attention that they deserve. Now, why didn't we give them that attention? We've got excuses like they're not properly structured. They do not really comply with regulations. There's no real business continuity. It's a one-man show, one-woman show. They don't do proper records keeping. And we have a whole list of things, which is why when we had the SMEs fund, we were not very keen as banks to even loan any money to the MSMEs. And now we've come to the crunch where we must. So my first proposal is that if you had the likes of a Siri and from PwC, so let me use her as a placeholder for PwC. If you were to link 2,000, even 2,000 MSMEs to PwC, and you gave ₦1 billion to PwC, and the number of sectors in which they're supposed to become productive before the end of 1 year, I bet you will get a much better result than if you had distributed that 1 billion into the hands of those same MSMEs. Because there is a level of incubation that will occur at the same time. There will be a level of due diligence that will still happen despite the tight timelines and despite the fact that it has to be spent through the MSMEs. So really what you need is a professional anchor. And we have played around with anchor borrower schemes, which we've done in agriculture, where one anchor could be representing 10,000 farmers or 15,000 farmers. And I know the government has given as much as 2 billion in loans to those anchors. So we should find a way to incentivize those who have the capacity to pull up the MSMEs and incubate them in this period. Because where we're going is for the long haul. Nigeria cannot afford to just produce for itself. In the medium term, 3 to 5 years, we must be a net exporter of agricultural produce. Data coming from the CBN governor was that I think Malaysia earned in 2017 about $12 billion from oil and gas, but earned about 14 billion from palm oil. And yet they got the seedlings from here in Nigeria. So it gives you an idea of the kind of gap that we have in exports, because we have to be able to strengthen our economy, and it must be based on production. That's number one. But the biggest hindrance to that would be the issue of data. Who do you know that you're actually giving anything to? I don't know why we have stalled the process of registering Nigerians and having a credible planning database. Now, it seems as though it's a lot of money, right? But the government is planning to spend 3.5 trillion naira on infrastructure in the name of COVID. 3.5 trillion. And yet it will cost them only about 15 billion to register some 100 million Nigerians. Right now, since our records began, we've not registered more than 40 to 50 million Nigerians out of 200 million. And yet, in a matter of 100 days, imagine you had 1,000 people with handheld devices who could do 100 registrations in a day. So 1,000 people per state, and you roll that out for 100 days only, you will capture more than 100 million people. It is possible. And now during COVID-19 is the best time when most people are actually home, not by their own choosing, but because they have to be. So we can change the landscape and change the story. And the other area is, how much do you give them? You have to give to MSMEs, because if, for instance, all my working capital was 250,000 naira, and I was smoking.
Uh-oh, the network is going bad.
Hello, I think we lost Mr. Pampa.
We did actually, and I got muted by the signal. So we lost.
I'm back.
I don't know who.
I'm back.
Okay, you're back. Okay, welcome back, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so sorry. My connection just dropped.
I mean,
But
these are part
I
of the
think it's,
infrastructure issues we have. Is okay.
yeah, I think it's a good place to leave it and let someone else comment. I hope you heard what I was saying about the
Sure,
professionals
I
and
did.
about data. Yes.
Yes. Thank you so much, Mr. Avamba.
Thank you.
Okay, so we will now we'll go ahead to Nkem. Uh, Nkem has quite, some experience dealing with, dealing with. I'm sure you interface with quite a number of, maybe not micro, but SMEs in your. What would you say are the biggest issues that MSMEs have at this time? And from your experience, can you just share with us can you provide some background, some contextual background that can set the tone for our conversation? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ayo. So I think that in terms of MSMEs, and their readiness for this crisis, especially with regards to technology, we're really looking at infrastructural gaps, and we're looking at basically, them not being set up for remote work, not being set up for collaboration, not being set up for, just basically serving their customers and creating a cohesive customer experience online. So I think that this is really the time where MSMEs and big corporates as well have to really think about their digital strategy and have to think about how they're going to position themselves, how they're going to position their customer experience for the near future, because things are not going to completely go back to normal. As we think about how we're going to exist in this low touch economy, and how we're going to exist in a place where we have a lot of issues in terms of actual physical interaction, and digital becomes the new normal and plays a bigger role. How do we get our companies ready for that, and how do we ensure that we are set up properly? So I think that those are the things that customers need to look at, companies need to look at. And we also need to dig very deep and see, how do you engage with your customers at a time like this? What type of value can you add to your customers? Because a lot of businesses are unable to sell at this time. Does that mean that they just stop and not engage with their customers, or are they able to actually engage with their customers? So these are all key challenges that are currently being faced by small and medium-sized businesses. A lot of them, especially businesses that are sort of in the training space, have reached out to sort of figure out how can they take their training online. Businesses who are in the retail sector have reached out to say, how do we transition into an e-commerce first approach, and how do we change our business strategy from brick and mortar to digital first? And I think that really is the right approach. I think that that's what businesses need to be focusing on, and they need to really rethink their strategies and rethink how they engage both with their staff and also with their customers, as I've mentioned before. So for me, it's something that is not an easy feat, especially because in these times most businesses are not earning. So if you're not earning, how do you actually invest in your IT infrastructure? How do you invest in your digital strategy? It's a really, really tough one. And I think that some of the government intervention funds and CBN intervention should actually focus on supporting SMEs to basically be able to invest into their technology and digital strategies and infrastructure, and ensure that they can use that to grow. Because I honestly believe that with the right digital strategy, a lot of enterprises will be able to pivot, will be able to stay alive, and will be able to actually continue to add value to the economy. And I think that that's vital at this point, because we're worried about big organizations, the banks laying off. But what happens when all the small businesses close? What happens when all those jobs are lost? I think that impact will be even bigger and felt even wider. And I think we need intervention around that. And as a nation, we need to start looking at our, infrastructure. Even this call is showing us that infrastructure is a huge challenge in terms of, connectivity and broadband. So we really have to, as a nation, strategically invest in that. We have to also think about access. How do we get access to as many people as possible? How do we also make sure that we, are using data and are taking data-driven decisions when we are actually making decisions and forming our strategy? And then also we need to, as a nation, invest in our human capital, because if we don't invest in our human capital, there will be nobody to actually build this technology that everybody is going to need, which will then make us consumers of foreign technology. And with the, naira that has completely plunged, it will be very hard to actually afford this foreign technology, because if $10 is 5,000 naira or more at some point, how do you cope? How do you cope with subscriptions? If you have to pay $10 per user per month, right? You will run into really, really big problems, because it simply will be unaffordable to you. So we need local solutions that are priced in local currency. But for that, we need to invest in human capital, and we need to do that very, very fast and at the highest urgency. We also need to look at our policies. How do we enable technology companies to scale? How do we invest in those technology companies? How do we create an enabling environment for those technology companies? How do we make sure that they have local funding available and don't have to rely on international funding that is currently mainly on hold? There are a couple of VCs, that are still investing, but the majority of people are, have put freezes onto their funds. So what does that then mean for our local tech ecosystem that relies heavily on foreign investment? So we need to also look at that, and we also need to, sort of think about, as a nation, what is our own digital strategy? How do we use technology to interface and engage with our citizens? And how do we also make sure that our citizens are digitally literate? I think those are key areas that we need to look at as a nation, before we even start talking about at enterprise level. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nkem. And I like the the last point that you made, which has to do with how we can even ensure that our people are digitally literate. The truth is that we are still battling um, with the most basic level of education, in terms of quality education at the basic level, and maybe a tall order getting our citizens to, uh, if we don't even have the infrastructure, how do you then begin to drive digital penetration across the chain, especially at the bottom of the pyramid? And that then brings me back to Tosin. I think a series sort of touched on some of those things. So I would take this to Tosin. A lot of times, I'm very passionate about SMEs, especially the guys who are on the small and micro end of the pyramid, because a lot of times when we have these sorts of platforms, some of our solutions tend to speak more to those who are the medium, or yeah, a bit of the medium and already scaling enterprises, and then we sort of overlook, or we sort of are unable to really tie down to address the pain point of those very smaller guys. So I'm going to ask you this, right? Now, data, facts don't lie, right? MBS says that over 97% of our micro businesses are not registered, and 75% of the small and medium ones have startup funding that is less than 10 million. And these are the guys who constitute an overwhelming percentage of our economy. So this clearly shows that, these guys may not be able to afford sophisticated legal services, and may be exposed to all forms of issues due to the unprecedented, you know, record of contractual breaches that we may have now due to this pandemic. So if MSME does not have sophisticated legal backing, does not have well put together contracts, what are the options that exist for them at this time? And for even the ones that have the contract, how do they protect themselves if they have gone outside of their contract due to unforeseen circumstances at this point in time?
Okay, thank you, Ayo. I think that it's very needed for us to understand, the demography of a lot of our small and medium scale businesses, and we cannot be unaware that a large percentage of businesses that fall within this value chain actually do not have or do not have exposure to get legal support for the kinds of contractual, transactions that they do. That being said, even within these arrangements, we still find that the small businesses are able to transact between themselves. Some of them have verbal contractual obligations that are established between themselves and their counterparties. And in those spaces, even much more than inside the conventional contractual arrangement, you will see that there is a very high level of trust. There's a very high level of commitment to obligations. A lot of people treat their obligations within these spaces as very sacrosanct. I mean, a lot of us, have dealings with some of them, your mechanic, your tailors, and what have you. You don't sign a contract with your mechanic when he's going to fix your car. But what you do is you ensure that in the selection process for the kind of service provider or supplier of good that you're going to do, you try to look out for people that are trustworthy. And so building a lot of these businesses, are driven on the back of trust. They are driven on the back of reputation and what have you. So a lot of times they are still able to function quite effectively within their space with the unconventional arrangements that they have. That being said, even with those unconventional arrangements and under the best circumstances where, there's trust, there's commitment and what have you, we are in a pandemic situation, and everyone and every business is affected. Nobody is immune. So if you did have contractual obligations, so for instance, say I'm a tailor and I had been contracted to make a nice dress for some lady, and I had the obligation to deliver the dress, say at the middle of April. I probably live in Abule Egba and I have my shop somewhere in Ogba, and I haven't been able to have access, to that location. And what that means is that the dress is probably, somewhere in Ogba. I can't reach it. My machines are in Ogba and all of that. The coloration of the challenges are not different, whether it's within the unconventional arrangement or within the conventional arrangement. So what then do? You cannot perform. The same principles would apply. There is an incidental breach that would happen on account of the circumstances that you're facing. How are you going to deal with that? You're going to deal with it by ensuring that you keep, the lines of engagement open, that you are open and upfront with the challenges that you are facing, that you do everything that is within your power to try to mitigate the impact of the circumstance on the third party client that is expecting service of you. And at the earliest time when you are able to deliver, you then try to ensure that the delivery of that service happens. So that's basically it. The penalty or the downside for any business that is operating within the unconventional spaces, if you lose credibility in this period, if you would lose your clients. If you lose your clients, then you probably would not have any business to return to post COVID-19. Now I'll go to the conventional space, which is where you have, the more sophisticated MSMEs, the mid-sized companies and what have you. So within this space, we actually do have a lot of people that have registered entities that have legal personality, and a lot of the contracting that they do are actually documented written contracts, right? And in that wise, many times, even within the MSME space, some of them cannot afford, the best legal support that is available. But at least, to a reasonable extent, you have some kinds of arrangements where there is, some kind of documentation of the contractual obligations between the parties. If it is a service driven organization, you would most likely have contracts that are signed at the time of onboarding a customer. If it's a technology driven one, you probably would have terms and conditions, that are listed on the website of the service user or the service provider. Now, irrespective of the contractual obligations between parties, we are seeing ourselves in an unprecedented circumstance where businesses, the whole business landscape is collapsing, and people are no longer able to even perform some of the basic obligations that they have to their clients or their customers. And therefore the question is, how has your contractual obligation anticipated this? If you have a formal contract with your customers, do you have any arrangement that indicates how to deal with these kind of circumstances? Many SMEs or MSMEs would not have contracts that may have anticipated, these kinds of circumstances, because they are usually simple contractual obligations flowing through from, one party to the other. And so I'm going to talk about one very fundamental principle of law that we need to apprise ourselves of. So apart from the laws that are applicable within the country, there is a common law principle of frustration, which applies effectively across every form of contracts that is in existence within the business landscape. And what is this? It's principally a common law principle that is backed by established judicial precedents that says that irrespective of the obligation between two contracting parties or two or more contracting parties, where it is impossible or impracticable for one party to perform an obligation on account of a circumstance that the parties could not have envisaged at the time that they contracted, together, then by virtue of law, the party that is expected to provide a service or deliver on an obligation will be relieved of the obligation to perform that contract on account of the circumstance. Now, I must establish that one, it must not be a circumstance that has been orchestrated or caused by that party itself. That's the first thing. The second thing is that it must not your non-performance must not be based majorly on an inconvenience or a write-up in the cost for performance. It must be that there is actually a circumstance that makes it impossible or impracticable for you to perform. In all of those circumstances, the law would come to the aid of the counterparty in that contract and permit a non-performance and a termination of the contractual obligation in that respect. Now, let me give some examples of what would, qualify, for this kind of defense. One, if I did have a contract and I was, for instance, a consulting arrangement where I was supposed to go to the United Kingdom to provide some consultancy service to a company in London. So the airspaces are closed down. I cannot travel, right? So what that means, in essence, is that there is no way that I can be physically present in London to perform that obligation. That is clear-cut frustration. Another example could be, so say that I have I have an obligation to deliver a good to a customer, or the example of the tailor that I gave before. The tailor is unable to get to the physical location where a client's property is, or the resources that is required for performance is, and therefore cannot deliver on that promise or that obligation to make a dress for a client at a certain date. That is frustration. However, there is one fundamental thing that we must remember, or that we must be mindful of. The law would also try to ensure that there is no unmerited or there's no transfer of gain to one party at the expense of the other. So if, for instance, the tailor has been paid, the full value of the dress that is supposed to be made and the dress cannot be made, the tailor does have an obligation to refund the money value that has been received, because I mean there can no longer be performance. However, if there has been part performance also, so I have met my obligation halfway, and of course I've incurred costs, the law is also fair enough to determine, what is fair and adequate to be, refunded to the other party or the counterparty on account of non-performance. So whether or not you have a contractual arrangement that deals with circumstances like this, let's be clear that the law does have a provision that protects parties in this circumstance. The other thing I'll talk about is the doctrine of force majeure, which I know that a lot of you have probably heard, you know, in used in a lot of business conversations in the last 2 months, even much more than any other time. So basically, what is the doctrine of force majeure? It simply means that parties have agreed that instead of being bound by the common law principle of frustration, which determines, which already has a set criteria for determining, okay, what will be considered frustration? How would the law view this? What kind of protection will be there for a party that cannot perform? And what kind of protection will be there for the party who, has performed their own obligation? In the force majeure circumstance, parties elect to define the scope and boundaries of frustration within a contract that they have signed. So we basically said and put in our contract to say these particular circumstances will relieve the parties of obligation to have to perform this contract. And sometimes it will read like, okay, circumstances like act of God, a flood, fire, tornado, medical emergency. Sometimes you even have, as specific as epidemic or pandemic being listed as some of those circumstances. The parties would also determine how or what would happen if any of those, defined circumstances do play out in the course of the performance of the contract, and how parties are expected to respond. So, for instance, if there is a contract that already defines, a pandemic or an epidemic or a medical emergency as, one of the grounds for force majeure, then we now need to determine. So, if it happens, what does the party that wants to claim, a force majeure have to do? Sometimes you have to give notice. Sometimes you have to show proof that you have actually suffered, a force majeure event. Sometimes the contract will say that it will be deemed suspended until the force majeure event is no longer subsisting. Sometimes it gives a timeline and says if within a 30-day period, a 60-day period, or a 90-day period, the force majeure event is still continuing, then we would terminate.
But Tosin, so sorry, so sorry to cut you. I just need to quickly clarify this. How often does force majeure clauses accommodate pandemics and this type of issues? Because I've heard this debate on media several times, and there doesn't seem to
So,
be a consensus. Yeah.
so to be fair, I have had to do advisory on, force majeure or frustration for clients in the last 1 month, maybe more than 20. And I have only seen one particular contract that actually captured, the scope of an epidemic or a pandemic as one of the circumstances. That being said, let me mention that the court would always, look at the intent of the parties. So even in situations where you may not have specifically listed, an epidemic or a pandemic as one of those grounds, it will look at all the other circumstances that have been listed and would induce whether there can actually be an established, intention that those kinds of circumstances will be covered. But in fairness to you, I haven't seen, a lot of contracts that have actually specifically captured, a pandemic as, one of the circumstances for force majeure. Just pretty quickly before I wrap up, I think I should mention that a lot of people are under the misconception that the principle of force majeure gives a better protection to to contracting parties. It's important to mention that a lot of times there is always a party that has the upper side of the stick. and a party that takes, the lower side of the stick. And the law does not give any form of protection or deduce what should happen, to support contractual parties through this process. It simply sticks with what the parties have agreed to happen. So, for instance, if I go back to the scenario of the tailor, if you do not have in your contract an obligation that requires that tailor to refund the monies that have been collected, and the contract, for instance, simply says when there's a force majeure event after 30 days, the contract is deemed terminated, and each party, is no longer has any obligation to the other. What that means in the strict interpretation is the tailor can walk without having an obligation to perform, to restitute, to refund, or what have you. So, I mean, people need to be minded that every time you enter into a contract that has a force majeure clause, you need to look at how it would impact you as a counterparty in that arrangement if there is ever a need um, to enforce the contract. I know so many people right now that have force majeure clauses in their contracts, and we're writing legal opinion upon legal opinion because, I mean, the companies are, or the businesses are in a worse state that they would have been if the contract didn't even have a force majeure, clause at all.
Wow.
So I hope that that has maybe provided some kind of context to the question, but I'm happy to provide any clarification if required. Thank you, Ayo.
I think, thank you so much, Tosin. That's very detailed. I'm very glad that it specifically speaks to those who are in the micro and small end of the chain because, again, as I said, I've noticed from my experience, even at our event at the SME bootcamp, that a lot of those who participate at these events, based on the demographics, are usually those in the small and micro space. But a lot of times we are unable to zoom in to their pins. But you've done excellently well. I must confess. I want to go back to Asiri. Hello, Asiri, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Yes, I am.
Yes, Asiri, while you were talking, you spoke about the need for business continuity. You spoke about transparency and quite a number of things that touch on the realities that are happening now and what MSMEs need to do. But I would like us to still take you through. And again, you also mentioned the obvious, which even though a lot of Nigerians are complaining about, is inevitable, which is having to suspend certain contracts, non-essential contracts, both for staff or expenses, and that would affect the well-being of people, to affect the well-being of businesses and all of that, right?
Mm.
Now, government has been trying to provide palliatives. We've heard you also listed quite a number of things that has been done over time. How now? Let's zoom into again small and micro businesses. If I have less than 5 personnel that work with me, and I do not have fancy operations, right? Even if I lay off two of them, I may not have necessarily cut as much cost as would affect, you know, sustainability in terms of demand. How exactly should government, how can government, in the face of availability of data and all that, what are the specific areas that government can adopt to reach these guys at the lower rung of the ladder?
Um, so I like the fact that Mr. Papa had, used the scenario with the anchor teams, and just having an incubation mechanism as well for ensuring that we pull together as many of these SMEs possible and groom them to that level where they're getting direct interface as well with the banks or other financial institutions identified to support. Um, it takes a number of measures as well to get to that level. So using your example now where you say you have 5 employees, you probably laid off 2, you still want to reduce costs, but that hasn't quite addressed it. I think the first thing for such an SME is um, just him doing his own homework. There's no one that can do that better for you than yourself. And just always thinking that government has the right solution for me as a business man will not be in your best interest. So there are certain things or opportunities that one could take advantage of to manage. Funny enough, I was just before this, I was looking at a puzzle that someone had sent to me on Twitter. And you could see that this businessman is trying as much as possible to get to the end goal. But every time when he tries, there's one issue that comes up, so that there are even more disruptions even beyond COVID-19 for a typical Nigerian SME. But the truth is, some of those, the answers lie with the SME themselves, and just being a bit more disciplined, regarding the way and approach they do things. And a good example really is around just financials. We're talking just now about the fact that sometimes you don't have contracts available, and in some cases you don't even see that some of the SMEs don't even have financials as well that can help them take advantage of some of the measures that government has put in place. Because the truth is that it's all those records that you have and that you have kept over time that will be leveraged on for any supports that you could take advantage of with the SMEs, for SMEs.
That's true.
Um, so a good example, even with the UK, so it's not unusual for any jurisdiction to insist on that kind of documentation. I was reading about some of the measures that the UK had put in place for their self-employed and even unemployed people, and they're giving grants as high as £4,500 or more. But then it's also subject to documentation that you've submitted for the past 3 years, tax returns that you filed, and being able to demonstrate that they're actually working capital deficits, or you really cannot do this work because of the pandemic that has come up. So documentation is very critical. So, and we need to go past that stage of I am just a very basic player in the market, I'm a small player, I don't know these things. The way we get financing from some of our friends and family, because that's a great source of capital for a lot of SMEs, is the same way you can get support, albeit professionally, from your friends and your families. There are a lot of families that have lawyers in them, they have accountants, they have some of these professional people that they can also leverage on. And sometimes we lose sight of those and just think money is the only thing that's required to grow a business. Taking advantage of those, and even into the internet, there are resources, there are templates for even documenting contracts that you can tweak, to just make sure you have a simple contract in place. And sometimes it's just understanding the basics, getting insights from trainings such as this or sessions such as this, where you can glean from other professionals without having to pay anything. That helps to gradually build your business. And then as you scale up, you then are able to bridge that gap that may have been created for lack of proper structures or processes in place. And then you can assess some of those measures that government, has put in place. So for that small guy, again, it's really looking inward. There might be other things that, you can address to reduce cost. Cost might not be the biggest thing as well to address. It might just be even your top line. Are you even getting any revenues in at all? Has your business model been disrupted because of this crisis? Is there anything I can do differently to bring in new income? A good example may be with, some of the retail outlets as well. Some of them were stress tests during this period, in the sense that some of them didn't even have online platforms for selling their staple products, whereas this would have been the biggest industry space to have a boom with a lot of people sitting indoors. And then you see some of them becoming innovative using WhatsApp as a method for, driving their sales or driving growth. But WhatsApp was not sufficient. And in other jurisdictions, you'll find that people already have created their internet, their websites, so that they can accommodate the crowd during that period. And that's only what our retail guys are beginning to do at this point in time. So foresight is also very important, not just being lax and comfortable where there's a boom. In the period of a boom, we should also be re-strategizing so that when crisis periods like this come, you have a reserve to fall back on. So I would say that for that small guy, it's not just about the cost as well. It's just also looking at your revenue lines, production and processes, your value chain, revisiting all of those and trying to identify quick wins in the interim, and then for the longer for building a more robust strategy that can take you through, as opposed to just focusing on singular items of cost, because that just creates panic for you and doesn't allow for growth.
Thank you so much, Asiria. Yeah, I think that does justice. I would go on now to Mr. Pampa. Mr. Pampa, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, we've had a couple of SMEs that now one of the biggest challenges that have faced that has been for that SMEs face is cost of funding, cost of capital, and all of that, right? And we naturally is going to get worse because of this pandemic, because the ability to pay is going to shrink because now costs are increasing, demand is crashing, and all of that. What are your takes on interest rates? Do you think it's time for the country to review its interest rate downwards? And what other options are there really for MSMEs in light of their existing loans vis-a-vis accumulated interest?
Okay, I think the first thing to remark is that interest rates are not arbitrary numbers. They're numbers that are underpinned by several assumptions that are being made by the central bank, by the banks themselves. So there are a lot of components that go into an interest rate. So it's not as easy as just reducing the interest rate. Like we shouldn't be fooled by the populist move that was done by the CBN that just suddenly cut the interest rate from 9% to 5%. I think what you can get is a rebate or some kind of clawback where it is the government itself that is paying your interest, at least some portion of it, or removing some part of it. For example, in the interest rate that is charged to SMEs, a good deal of it might be based on not being able to identify easily who the bank is dealing with. What sort of risk are we taking? Who is this individual? How faithful are they in dealing with finances and so on? So you'll find that there could be that kind of factor. And if the government is guaranteeing the money, then that's a component that can be removed by the bank. So I think that the government helping to put a few things, for example, guarantees and so on in place, can help the interest rate to actually then go down as close as possible towards single digits. And I think this is the time to do so, especially if we want to jumpstart our production. If we want to get MSMEs producing again and starting, we need to get the money to them. I've already talked about how to overcome the other challenges, because their challenges are not financial alone. There's a lot more than finance. But if we have the right partnerships, and we have them in the right incubator, and we are able to get the finance to them, then we should worry also about the cost. And if you have the incubator and you have several other things that help to guarantee that you can overcome some assumptions you've made, then you should be able to drop the interest rates for the MSME. Over to you then, Ayo.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pampa. I would go now to Nkem. I remember, I think it was a series or that spoke about, or Tosin that spoke about decision-making responsiveness and transparency and all of that in the value chain in the way that we do business. But there's something else in the digital angle that affects a lot of SMEs, and that is trust. You know, the level, there seems to be a huge uh, trust deficit between the people and customers, especially in the customers who use digital channels. And the results are everywhere. We've seen quite a number of e-commerce companies either exit the market, merge, or close shop. Now that we are recommending that more SMEs should migrate to using digital channels and all of that, how do you suggest that our listeners who run SME businesses close this gap, increase the trust levels that their customers have for them, and you know, what are your closing thoughts? You can share your closing thoughts with us so that we wrap up. Thank you.
So I think that the word here is excellence, right? If you have excellent products and excellent customer service, your customers will trust you, right? And I think that that's really where it ends and starts. It's not about the channel that people buy on. It's not about anything else. It's really about how good are your products and how reliable are you? How reliable is your distribution network and your delivery as well, right? So if you say we deliver within 3 hours, make sure you deliver within 3 hours. If you say you deliver within 5 days, make sure you deliver within 5 days. If you say that, you know, our products are high quality, make sure your products are high quality. You cannot make empty promises and think that you're going to find, you know, customers who are happy when you break. I think really this is the time for you know, companies to make sure that number one, whatever they put on their e-commerce site is actually in stock. Number two, that they have a sufficiently big enough range of products on their site as well. Number three, that the site works properly, right? Number four, that there are sufficient various payment channels and that payments can be confirmed either automatically or within very, very short periods of time, right? There has to be a process. E-commerce is not about technology. E-commerce is about customer service, right? E-commerce is really about the customer experience that the customer has on your site. So once the order is placed, there should be an immediate phone call to the person to say, hi, Nkem, you placed this order. We just wanted to confirm your address. We wanted to make sure that, you know, these are the products that you've ordered. And then you confirm those key details that you need of that customer. You confirm the payment, and then you move on. And I also think that it's a little bit wrong to say that trust is the major issue why businesses exited the e-commerce space, right? I think we need to dig a little bit deeper and actually unravel some of the layers. We did not have a logistics infrastructure, which meant that the big e-commerce players that came into the space 7 years ago had to build that infrastructure. We did not have warehousing infrastructure. They had to build that. We did not have payment infrastructure. A lot of them built that, right? Delivery networks, distribution partners, all of these things were not available. And that actually took much more money than in any other part of the world where that infrastructure already exists, right? So at some point, when you don't have more cash to burn, you will be forced to exit. When it comes to the smaller players, in 7 years ago when Konga and Jumia entered the market, we doubled our customer base, and the majority of new customers that we got were people building e-commerce sites. And one of the things that I noticed then was that they had no idea what selling online actually means and how much you have to spend on digital marketing to actually drive traffic to your site. So they rushed to build a site without having the knowledge of what next, without having the infrastructure in place. And that will definitely diminish trust, right? And it will not get you the result that you're looking for. So I think we just need to, be very careful when we talk about, the failure of e-commerce across the continent, right? There are many, many factors that have led to that failure. Trust is just one of them, and it's a very small one. So for small businesses that are now looking to build their own e-commerce platforms, it is really, really important to make sure that number one, as I said, your products are available. Number two, you have reliable delivery partners. There are no stories around pricing for delivery or whether you were not delivered or you did deliver or the delivery came at 11 p.m. All those things are a bad customer experience. So if you actually look at the customer experience and ensure that the customer experience is seamless, you will build trust and you will make sure that people actually are the ones to spread the word, right? They will tell their friends, oh, this is a good company. Oh, they always deliver on time. Oh, they, go the extra mile. The packaging is always nice. The bags that they use are neat. In these low touch times, it is also to look at how do you enhance your packaging for a no touch delivery, right? Which means that you probably have to have additional layers of packaging that you can integrate into your current delivery packaging to make sure that people can peel off one layer and then have access to safe products that they can consume, right? So there's a lot of thought that has to go into the back end of your e-commerce. It is not technology. Technology is just a platform. Anyone can build the technology. It is the processes that drive the success of your e-commerce, right? And I think that that's really important. And then obviously digital marketing plays a massive role in the success of your e-commerce. If you do not drive traffic to your site, you will not get customers, right? So the question is always, when I build it, will they come? What are you doing for them to come, right? And I think that that's where we really, don't actually understand the massive investment that is required. If we look at, the market entry of Konga and Jumia 7 years ago, the marketing budgets, this is not just digital, this is marketing cross-border nationwide for each of them was about $3.6 million for a year, right? So when you then say, oh, I have 50,000 Naira as my marketing budget, you are not going to see the massive results, right? So you have to be realistic and you have to be creative, right? It doesn't mean that with a small budget, you cannot build a customer base. You can build a customer base, but this means that you have to take a mix. You have to have a brand story. You have to invest in your branding. You have to invest in your digital marketing. You have to invest in your social media. You have to ensure that responses are fast. You have to ensure that questions are answered immediately. You have to ensure that you're engaging your customers. So the work is not the technology. The work is everything around it. The work is the actual selling, the actual customer experience. And I think that small businesses just really need to take a step back before building technology and actually look at what is my customer experience like and how do I ensure that that customer experience is seamless, because there are enough brands who are selling successfully even without an e-commerce platform. They're doing social media, social commerce basically, and selling via Instagram, and extremely successful. They have orders going out every single day. So trust, I think, is not the real issue. It is more around the processes and how we actually ensure that we have great customer service and a great customer experience as well, and that our back-end processes are air and watertight, that we have proper documentation of each single order, that we have inventory management, that we ensure that the delivery companies that we work with are properly equipped with PPE as well now, right? So those are all things that we need to consider. So yeah, and in terms of my closing thoughts, I think that business owners just simply need to now really take time to invest in themselves and get more knowledge around digital and how they can actually use digital to automate their businesses and to enhance their businesses and optimize both their processes and also their customer experience. This is the time to build. This is the time to experiment. This is the time to engage your customers. Everybody is online, right? this is something that will most likely very much.
So much, Nkem. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You've done justice to the topic. Again, trust is never the only issue. Trust is just an output of a whole lot of elements that serve as the input. So all of those things, inefficient processes, inadequate or lack of quality customer service, commitment to excellence. MSMEs have to ensure that all of these things are top notch because you may not have the advantage of scale or the advantage of financial resources. So the best you can do, as Nkem has said, is to commit to excellent customer service delivery and make sure that everything you're doing, irrespective of the size, is top notch so that your customers would always be loyal to you and then you can grow despite the challenges that we have. So I'll go to Isiri, then Tosin, then Mr. Pampa for their closing thoughts.
Oh, sorry, I was speaking on mute. Um, so I think we really shared a lot today on perhaps most aspects of the businesses and how we can just thrive this period. And maybe I'll just close with two sayings or one, which is that you know this it's from NS Shackleton, something I'd learned just attending one of the Harvard business sessions, which a lot of SMEs I think should take advantage of now. These are free online, and it says here a man must shape himself to a new mark the minute the old one goes aground. And this was just coming or leveraging off of the experience that Ernest had with trying to um, discover the Antarctic continent, which was a very tasking project at the time for them and would have involved them sailing through ice and probably their ship being, stuck on ice and they couldn't get to the end of the pole and all of that. But I think the learning lessons or the life lessons that I think we can also just glean from is the ability for them to toggle seamlessly between day-to-day management and just leading, the mission, which would be your primary reason for staying a business. What's your vision? What's your mission? Stay true to that despite the day-to-day challenges as well, taking full responsibility for that growth and continually improving on it. I think we've also mentioned that. Discipline to face forward and not just always keep, keep thinking about past errors. But then also one thing that stuck or stands out for Ernest Shackleton is the ability to just be in charge of your people as a leader and be that visionary in terms of humanity and showing care. This is not the time where you want to keep raising your voices and shouting because that doesn't increase productivity. It's really about bringing the strengths of your people together through collaboration and not just your own company or business, but also looking for areas of collaboration with other businesses and identifying innovation in all of this. So again, we must continue to shape ourselves regardless of what's around us, and because that's what proves the strength of any man or woman in any crisis. Thank you, Ayo.
Thank you so much, Isiri. You've done amazing well. You've done amazingly well for us today. Tosin, your closing thoughts, please.
Okay, thank you, Ayo. I think I would just stay a bit around contract performance and enforcement again. Couple of things that I think that people should be mindful of. There are several many ways to get to the other side of the road. And one of the things that I think that a lot of small businesses should try to avoid in this period is dispute or anything that would make you take the limited resources that you have fighting battles in court or in other places. I think that I would speak, consistently for continued engagements with your stakeholders and counterparties. People have tended to be a lot more reasonable than expected, from my experience in this period. We've had circumstances as a business where we've had to suspend some of the contracts that we had with some of our service providers, even when the contracts that we had with them did not permit us to. But we've, taken the told the line of, continuous engagement, and we found that, many of them were more than willing, to give, considerate middle of the ground solutions, especially when they feel that, you're not just looking out for your own personal interest. You are open to ensuring that, fair consideration is given to all the parties across board. I would also say that, I mean, a lot of people have talked about, dealing local. There's going to be a lot of, scaling backwards with, some of the obligations, contractual arrangements that we make, with counterparties overseas. Now you would see a lot of people, having to deal with other, suppliers or local service providers. Let's be mindful of the peculiarities of dealing, you know, you know dealing or contracting locally, and all the challenges we've spoken about, around infrastructure, delays in our court systems. Ensure that you have very watertight standard contracts that, protect you even as you, advance and try to, close, some of these engagements. And then finally, I just wanted to mention also that there are many, digital legal service channels now that are available, where people can avail themselves at very minimal cost, finding contractual documents or agreements that at least give you, the basic protection that you need. And where you can, for high level or high stake transactions, please use a lawyer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tosin. Uh, Thank you so much. I'm sure participants have benefited a lot from your wealth of knowledge. Mr. Pampa, please.
Yeah, I think this is the time for small businesses to consider the fact that the reset button has been pressed. It wasn't pressed by them, so they were not ready, but it's a reset button nonetheless. And this is a big opportunity to rethink the entire business from concept to cash. How do I move what I move in order for it to become cash in the bank? It's a good chance to look through it again. I want to suggest that it's also the time for shared services, that this is the time to look towards the PwCs, the KPMGs, the smaller professional firms, and so on, and say, if we came as 20 small businesses, would you help us do our books? If we came as 40 businesses, would you help out for people to be more compliant, for people to also meet standards, because people will be more careful the sorts of partners they have in their supply chains. Certainly, if you're not trustworthy and you cannot meet the standards, you'll be weeded out. So it's a time to actually look at the standards that you live up to and get help to achieve it. But it's also a time where there's opportunity. You spoke about, or somebody mentioned a training company. This is the time to start e-learning, delivery of e-learning services, taking everything online. Yes, you may not charge as much per person, but you may have a multiplier on the number of persons you can have at the same time, and a huge reduction in your costs as well. So it's a time to relook at your model entirely from concept to cash, as I said. I think also this is the time that volume business will make more sense than trying to service one customer or two customers, because reach and ability to get to them is going to be a little constrained from time to time as we go through various cycles of this virus going away, coming back, and so on. We have to accept that it's probably going to be with us at least for the next 3 years. In and out. So we may have lockdown at any time, disruption to the way we do business at any time, and therefore it's the time to inoculate ourselves against the disruptions that could occur by changing very fundamentally the business. If we have a chance to reach the policy makers, it's the time to also speak to them about the approach. We really need to fast track help to MSMEs at this time. Thank you, Ayo.
Thank you so much, Mr. Apampa. Your closing comments are absolutely brilliant solutions for MSMEs, because I've always been worried about the fact that our MSMEs are excluded from the bucket or the chain of professional services that exist in the market because of their purchase, because of their buying power. I mean, they can't afford PwC, they can't afford KPMG, they can't even afford the medium to smaller size professional services. So you discover that they are the ones that need these things the most, but they are the ones that are not getting it. And this concern was what led to us putting together the Lagos SME Bootcamp to train them on all of these basic things. And I really hope that ACU is still on the line and the big firms can find a way to deliver these solutions as you recommended. I don't know if we still have some time to take questions from our participants. It goes there. Yeah, we'll take some questions from the participants, please.
And maybe while we're just trying to get the questions very quickly, Ayo, to the point on PwC supporting, we do have an SME desk as well. And in fact, we've invested a lot in analysis for SMEs that they can take advantage of. We'll be releasing our maiden report this year on MSMEs, and it has a lot of insights too that they can take advantage of. It includes case studies on successful SMEs and what strategies they've adopted, to succeed in this environment, and just what we should be thinking of as well post, this crisis. So we would be doing a webinar shortly for that and a physical launch as well.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well.
Okay, do we have questions, please? Okay, maybe while we're waiting for the questions, we will do a quick demo of the MSME standards platform for the benefit of our viewers.
Yes, thank you very much, Ayo. My name is Maduka Okafor. I'll be taking us through some of the pages from the MSME standards. First of all, I want to thank you, Ayo, Esiri, Tosin, Gemdelim, and Apampa. It was really, really interesting. In fact, you took me back to school. I learned a lot. So I'll be sharing my screen right now. So can you see the screen?
Hello? Yes, we can.
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so the website address is www.msmestandards.com. So some of the takeaways from the presenters so far are that most times the small businesses are ignorant of what they need to do. And also, in some cases, they need leverage to actually get what they need to be, what they need to do done. So this platform, the MSME standards, provides some of these leverages. Mr. Pampa also mentioned the fact that some of these MSMEs need people to stand in for them as a form of help to get them compliant. So if you look at this platform, the MSME standards, first of all, it provides the small businesses information on what they need to do to get compliant, which if you click, for example, on this compliant page, because we have partnership with some of these agencies, any of them you click on, it tells you what it requires for you to be compliant in that regard. And again, that depends on the kind of business you offer as an SME. Any of them you click, and as we get some of these, we'll be adding them to the platform. Also, the back end support mentioned by Income, which also means that you need to be available to provide support for these people that need some of these services. We also have this included. It's not all about technology, like she said. You also have to be available to ensure that you help these guys get what they need to um, do. So if you click here, we are also available most times to provide responses to your questions as it may come. Then we also have the tools on this platform that can assist.
Hello, Monica, I think you're sharing the wrong screen. It's your file browser we're seeing, not the MSME standard.
Wow. I think I need to reshare it. I'll unshare and share again. Sorry about that. Okay, so I hope it's showing now.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so I was mentioning the fact that on this platform, you can get information regarding the requirements for your businesses, as the case may be. If you click on the compliance requirements, you have to get to this page to get to see for each of those compliance required. Those requirements you need to get your business compliant. We have them on the platform. And we have partnership with some of these agencies to make sure that these things are constantly updated. And we can also have a one-on-one with site visitors and SMEs that may come on board to require some certain information. Then we also have some tools that will help the small businesses also get themselves compliant to have that trustworthy certification, so to say, for them to be able to be given funds for businesses. We also found out that in the course of our research that some of the problems with these small businesses is because they may not have some certain things put in place for them to be able to do business with. Then if you also go to the certification page here, this is where we have some of the tools available on this platform that help you get compliance. So here you get to check your risk compliance, you check your governance and controls compliance, and all these you do them yourself. There are sets of questions, standardized questions that enables you, when you answer them, it gives you a particular level of your compliance, the compliance of your organization, to know where you begin to seek help. For example, if I come on as a service user here, Sorry, this is not a service user. Let me come up with one of the service users here. So I log in as a service user. It is assumed that this person is already registered on the platform as an SME. So this person wants to find out, for example, what my risk assessment, as my level of risk assessment, where I am in terms of risk assessment, or where I am in terms of the standard I'm supposed to have for my organization. So I click on this, for example, it gives me this set of tools. Now for each of these questions, it also gives me the requirement that I need to have, e.g., under regulatory compliance, I need to have this registration certificate, director CO2 as required, shareholder, and so on and so forth. Then it tells me also whether I fully meet or substantially met or partially met. So depending on your response to each of these set of questions, at the end, it gives you a certain level where you are regarding your compliance. So all these areas shows that you need to bridge these gaps. So the good thing about this platform also is that at the end of the day, you can also seek help from the service providers available on this platform. So which also says that, which also means that service providers can come on this platform, register to provide services for these SMEs. So depending on where you are or what you need to bridge the gap to get compliant, the service providers on this platform provide you with those services. Now, some of these services may be paid, some may not be paid. Again, the difference with getting service providers on this platform to assist you is that for any of these service providers you pick to provide services, for you don't need to lose sleep over them because they've been vetted, verified, and certified before they come up on this platform. So when you request for service and make payments, if the service requires making payments, they do not get to receive these payments until they deliver the services. Also, you get the opportunity to rate the service provision for these service providers. So if, for example, I require a service under regulatory, say under risk assessment, for example, and I'm looking for someone to train me on risk management. So when I search, if there is any organization that provides such services under risk training or risk assessment, I'll have them listed here so that I can engage them to provide services for me. Trying to see if any of them has provided services they render. None of them so far. But what happens here is once you search for services, if there is any of these service providers that have those services entered through their own profile page, you are able to see the list of services here and you can engage them to provide those services for you. So in a nutshell, the MSME standards provides you with information that gives you a list of all requirements you need to get your business compliant. It also provides you with some tools, standardized tools, the COSO standard tools to enable you answer those set of questions and place you or tell you where exactly your organization is. And thirdly, it also provides you with access to our e-learning platform where you get to see all the different trainings peculiar to your organizations that you need, including some organizational tools like the risk assessment tools and so on and so forth, so you can use as a template to carry out your own activities in-house. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Maduka, this is such brilliant platform that this is quite interesting. I would, in fact, I'm thinking that, if you if you would be willing to come share Yeah, I'm back. Oh, I'm back. Apologies, I logged off. I don't know. Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello, we
Yes,
can
apologies.
hear you.
I was logged off.
Okay.
I don't know if you heard the last question, Mr. Pampa.
Sorry, which question?
Okay, I'll take it again. Um, okay, I've lost it. Please, can you send me that question back? But I have a question here for Tosin. Um, Tosin came and Siri. I think I'll start with Tosin. It says, what are the ways in which women can receive support in their in the business space during crisis times like the COVID-19 pandemic?
All right, Ayo, thank you. Interesting question. I typically don't like to look at support from a gender specific angle. So I think I would like to remodel the question to say how can businesses receive support. So whether it's a business that is driven by women or not, but I would also address the fact that both male and female entrepreneurs should have equal access to financial support, stimulus, or any kind of capital support in this period. So I think that one way that we can is to position ourselves to enjoy the benefits of some of the stimulus that the government has made available. I think a series spoke about the NISOL facility that is available to small and medium scale enterprises. I think that is one. I think sometimes you need to also get creative about um, a capital model or structure that can work for your business. However small, there are also unconventional ways that you can aggregate capital within your own support system or your value chain. If you have built, a sustainable business that is on the back of trust with your customers, sometimes you'll be surprised that there would be a couple people out there that are willing to put in capital to the business that you're doing. Also, there is access to capital from VCs and other type investors that look for value driven organizations that have very high growth potential and are sometimes willing to provide seed capital to those kind of businesses. You should definitely look in that space, even though we know that there's a lot of capital drain in this period. There will also be a lot of capital that is looking for people that have resilient businesses and businesses that have very high growth potential. to, you know, put money, and small businesses, you know, are very well positioned to receive this capital because a lot of them, you know, their overheads are small and they are able to scale very relatively. They don't have a lot of, you know, heavy, you know, overheads and, you know, and structures that would keep them away from being able to be agile or be very, you know, adaptable in this period. So I think one should look at that. I mean, banks, a lot of banks also have, you know, some solution that is tailored to small businesses, especially in this period where, you know, they're considering, you know, giving out facilities to high growth, you know, small businesses. And some of them are even willing to, you know, take, you know, equity risk with such players. I think, I mean, we should be looking, you know, in these places. I'm waiting to see, you know, some of the subnationals also tell, you know, the kind of support that they would be giving to small businesses, particularly in the area of capital. I think they've been inundated with, you know, just trying to deal with the follow-on effect of the pandemic. But I'm certain that in no in the nearest future we would see, you know, a lot of them, you know, also coming up with you know, solutions as to how, you know, they would support small businesses. So for me, these are some of the areas that I think that we should look at. I've talked about, you know, coming up with, you know, not so sophisticated, but internal, you know, capital raise structures amongst your own value chain, customers, clients, family, friends, and what have you. So, I mean, that's it from my end, and I'll be happy to hear what other panelists would contribute. Thank you, Ayo.
Thank you so much. Okay, Esiri, your takes on this, please.
So I might just add some of the women support groups are also a good place to get you know, some of this kind of support, and like the Women's Inspired Women group, Africa Women on Board. There are quite a number of them, and the opportunity they offer really is the strength in numbers, and some of these organizations have already, you know, collaborated with some financial organizations to support, you know, women specifically, so you can take advantage of those groups. They also have, you know, subsections for women in business. WIMBIZ particularly does a great job at that, so you might want to consider that. Some of the private equity funds as well, social impact funds, also tend to have things for women because they consider that women are very vital to growing economies. When you train a girl child, you've trained a village, they say. It's not something that's taken for granted. And I think a lot of countries have also grown because of that. You know, closing that gender gap is very important for us as a nation. So some of the social impact funds do this. One that comes to mind readily is Pathfinders. And there was a very unique story there for one of the businesses they supported with manufacturing pads, sanitary pads for ladies in the north. So, and again, the only way you might find some of those issues coming through is when there's a woman that's thinking of what another woman doesn't, you know, have, or what another woman needs. Whilst men are good business people, sometimes identifying with those needs can be a bit challenging as well for them. And this is where the strength of the woman is. So identifying those kind of social impact funds as well will go.
I don't know. I think Tosin had to leave. So I may have to take Mr. Pampa. There's a question for you here, please. They say, what's the best approach CBN should take in managing the foreign exchange so it does not have adverse effect on businesses?
Yeah, before we talk about adverse effect on businesses, we should even talk about adverse effect on the economy. I think the management of our foreign exchange has been very poor up to date. you will find that we have used most of our foreign reserves to intervene on the price of the naira to try and shore up the naira at the old exchange rate. And so we were living in a fool's paradise for a long time. Many of the portfolio investors, the so-called foreign investors, came in to speculate on our market. They bring in $1 and they leave with $1.4. And that $0.4 actually comes out of our foreign reserves. So we have just been depleting the money that has been available. There is no shortcut to it apart from improving productivity, because the price of oil, the oil receipts have dwindled, and we are not producing at the moment. So until we get all of those things back, I'm afraid there's no magic. We're going to have to take the shock of wherever the naira lands in terms of foreign exchange. I don't think there's any magic the CBN can do, because we've depleted our foreign reserves and we don't have the sources to replace the money, which oil would have done if oil had continued in the boom that it was prior to the crash. So I'm sorry I don't have a very helpful answer on that particular score. Ayo.
Well, I think in as much as you've said you don't have something helpful on that, but what you've said is also helpful, because I mean the truth is that CBN has to come up with a more sustainable approach to our FX management. Again, as you said, it's really about the economy and not even so much about SMEs or businesses. So now that Tosin is not here, I think I'll take this to a series. Is the series still online, please? Is the series still with us?
Yes, I am.
Okay. A series. Somebody is asking if it is that no matter the business, there is a need for a contract between the employer and the employees and the suppliers, even if you can't afford legal fees.
So this is absolutely important. Reason being that you couldn't even have engaged your employee or your supplier if you didn't have a contract in the first instance. Contracts don't only have to be written, they can be verbal. And the fundamental is that there's an acceptance, there's an offer, you've accepted that offer, and there's a fee or a price to it. That's the fundamental for any contract. So when it is written, it gives you more certainty. It provides or allows that there is no subjectivity, or there is no room for someone to then come back and say, no, this was not what we agreed. That is the advantage of having it written. So yes, you should have a written contract. If you can afford to do so, do it. You don't need to pay a lawyer to write a contract down. Start with the simple and basic steps of saying, what have we agreed to do between the two of us? And what is the price that you are willing to pay for this? Do I agree to that price? Then begin to think about what would happen in circumstances where there are possible disputes. If that person did not finish the work at the date that it was supposed to have been finished, what happens? Do I then say that I will not pay you the amount? Put it in the contract. So that's the very basic step. Now, in terms of the fine lines around how that contract should now be structured, this is where your lawyers will come in. And you already would have tried to reduce that cost by taking that first step in writing your own basic contract. The good thing about also having the contract is when it comes to, again, communication with banks or even other financial institutions for loans, or even the tax authorities, which tend to be one of the biggest problems for Nigerian SMEs as well. Those contracts will become very useful in helping you to get the much needed funds that you need, because those will be the fundamentals for any financials that you would prepare. In the absence of any written document, it's unlikely that you'll be able to do your financial reporting properly. And without those financials, the tax man will be very happy to just, take the higher end of the stake, and then you're left with nothing in terms of returns that you've made. So getting or putting those contracts in place are important. The cost should not be the one that drives you away from doing it, because what you stand to gain is much more than that amount that you pay for the legal fees. It's more in terms of those unintended additional costs that you probably hadn't thought of that may come up in the future. So thinking around cost is not just the present, it's also about the future. Ayo.
Yes, thank you so much, Esiri. I think that has done justice to that question. Unfortunately, we can't, we won't be able to take.
Can I jump in here, please?
Okay, yes, please do.
Can I jump in here, please?
Please do, Mr. Pampa.
Because this is a very important point. This is where we need professionals to create a pro forma of an employment contract and then help not one SME, but help 20 SMEs or help 20,000 if they can put it online and people can buy a form contract, a standard form that they can edit and use. The same thing if you want to set up a contract with your supplier, here is a standard form. And that's why on the MSME standards, they are allowing service providers to join for free and provide these services, because there's a great need for all of these things to be simplified. Even accounting services being done in batches for the SMEs. Except professionals look at these new business models, our MSMEs will continue to struggle. But I support everything that has been said.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pampa, for always holding the back of our MSMEs with regards to availability and accessibility of services, professional services for them. I can't thank you enough, because this is one area that is very close to my heart. Okay, so I don't think we have any more questions. And even if we do, sadly, we run out of time. So I will just go on to CBI Nigeria to give us the closing remarks and appreciation. Thank you so much, everyone.